Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country right now. Welcome to this session, and it's entitled Transforming Our Roadblocks to Serenity. I'm grateful to Pastor Kelsey B for inviting me to participate in this way. And I hope that what we share this morning or this afternoon serves you and contributes to your ministries, whether it's a lay ministry, whether it's a called ministry. We're all in ministry together, and I hope that this adds to your experience. So we're going to talk a little bit about serenity. We're going to talk about what is serenity, how do we receive it, and I use that word intentionally, and how do we maintain it? How do we continue to dwell in serenity, even in the midst of challenges and struggles and things of that nature? So in my personal life, I recently decided that I was going to commit my ministry and calling to practicing non-anxious presence. It's a day-by-day work to remind myself and to lean into that calling. But I'll share a little bit about why I think that's very important. A few months ago, my stepbrother was shot and killed. When I found out that he died, and I hadn't had an extensive relationship with him for some time, but we share our little sister, and we so happens that my stepbrother and my biological brother, with whom I grew up my whole life, have the same name. And so when my sister contacted me and said that Tony died, my initial reaction was for the Tony that I lived with the most. And it took me to a lot of places emotionally, mentally. And then I became aware there's my stepbrother. And then it took me to some different places because it had been so long. And I wondered, how things could have been different. I went through all the things that we go through when we hear about things that we somehow imagine we have some control over. But one of the places that it took me was surprising was it took me to a place of feeling like I don't belong. And I explored it. And the reason why it took me to that place was because in the context in which I serve, it didn't seem that this type of event is something common to this area. And so I didn't know how to share with my community that my family had this experience. And I decided to keep it to myself a little bit until I felt that I knew how to share it. But then in about 2 weeks from that time, there was a shooting in my town in Boulder, Colorado, a mass shooting where 10 people were killed in a grocery store. And that took me back to that other feeling. And I asked the question, what can church be in this time that people cannot readily find elsewhere in society? And when I thought about that question, I thought about the anxiety that is rampant in our society, the fear, distrust, all the things that are relational blocks to us building the types of communities that we aspire to. And then somehow the words non-anxious presence came into my consciousness. And I knew that I heard it somewhere before. I knew I might have heard it in seminary, but I hadn't studied it in depth. But I felt this conviction that the contribution that I could be in my ministry and in my relationships is to practice non-anxious presence. And then that took me to an understanding of serenity. And so that's how we get to where we are right now. And we continue to see things happening in our world, and we get frustrated or we get scared or we get all the natural feelings that come up. And then as church, we've especially in the United Church of Christ, where justice is our orientation, it seems to some people that serenity and working for justice are not compatible, or rest and working for social justice are not compatible, or working towards anti-racist systems and government and other areas of life are not compatible with serenity. And I submit that they are very much compatible, because the teachings that we lean into, the teachings that are here to energize us as Christians or those who study the teachings of Christ, compel us to do things that are antithetical to our anxious society. One of them is, we've heard, do not worry. And I'm a short person. You can't tell from the video, but I'm a short person. And there was this scripture passage that I read when I was younger in the King James version of the Bible. And it said, who by worrying can add a single cubit to their stature, which basically means are you going to get any taller by worrying? And I realized that the chances of me getting any taller by worrying were never going to happen. And I so happen to have a father that's 6'2", or he was 6'2", and I'm 5'4". So people would often ask me, like, why are you so short? And I would think, like, one of these days I'm going to get taller. I'll catch up. I wear size 11 shoe. It's possible. One of these days I'm going to get bigger. But my feet stayed the same size, and so did the rest of my body. So it looks like I wear little skis all day. But I learned that my worrying wasn't going to change things the way that I thought they might. And there are elements of life that I cannot control. And my worrying is a misguided attempt at controlling what's not controllable. But there are things that I can influence. They can give me a modicum or a small amount of control in certain spaces. And that is to work towards cultivating peace and serenity within myself. There are certain things that we face in life. In James 1:2, he compels his hearers. He says, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of any kind, consider it nothing but joy, which is antithetical to almost everything that we experience. And he says that because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let your endurance have its fullest effect, so that you may be mature and complete, lacking in nothing. And in the work that we do, whether we're lay leaders or whether we're ordained, as people walking by faith, and ideally not by sight, but living from a vision of a future that we know is possible, when people see us in the world and we seem as stressed out as everyone else, as anxious as everyone else, our hope is put in systems and not in relationship. It communicates a message that I don't think we intend to communicate. But if we can figure out how to dwell in the world that we know is possible, even now, to dwell in it, to take time to dwell in it, we become an invitational, non-anxious presence that then creates a sense of wonder for people who, even though we go through trials and we go through experiences and there are tough times and there's work to be done and justice to be fostered, that by coming in contact with this peace does not diminish our capacity to work toward that vision in such a way that others can see it and dwell in it as well. So I'll say a couple more things, and then I'm going to show you a little video, and then we're going to have a little bit more of a conversation about it. But one of the things I want to ask you as people of faith is, would you want your inner life for anyone else? When you think about your inner life and you think about people in the world, whether they're your friends or your family or a neighbor, would you want them to have your inner life? And if the answer to that question is no, then the greatest service in those who try to live those two great commandments of loving God and neighbor as self is to have an inner life worth sharing, to have an inner life that you would want others to have the peace, or to, as Gandhi put it, be the change you want to see in the world. So now I'm going to offer, if I have the ability to share screen, I want to show a little clip that may hopefully it'll make you laugh, but it's ask the question of, what does serenity look like? So I'm going to pull that up real quickly.
What happened here, Kramer?
Serenity now.
Kramer!
Jerry, I didn't hear you come in. Yeah, the children, they've done some redecorating.
You don't look well.
Huh? Oh, well, that's odd, because I feel perfectly at peace with the world. Hey, Eggs, you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Look at me. I stepped on your last rose.
Jerry, come on. Don't get so upset about it. There's always next spring. Would you excuse me for a moment?
Serenity now! There, I did it! I beat Braun! Serenity now! Come on, let's see how the computer. Serenity now! Why couldn't you squeeze one of those stupid rubber balls to get you stressed out? Why did did you have to destroy 25 computers?
George, you listen to me. I owe you one.
He's incorrigible. You want to talk about it?
Oh, please don't tell me you love me again, Jerry. I can't handle it.
So how often have you tried to do whatever you have to do to be serene, to be at peace? Meanwhile, there's a rage monster going on inside, or something that's the opposite of serene. And to me, at least, I think that example from Seinfeld is a good example of how some of us experience serenity. We try to keep a face that looks like we're calm and we're at peace. And then on the inside, we're raging, or sometimes even worse, it spills out elsewhere in our lives, in places that have not called for that kind of energy. And what kind of contribution could we be if we, being the change that we want to see in the world, we're able to be honest with what arises within us, and then even honest about our anger, honest about our disappointment, honest about our shame or our sadness, but to be able to have the spaciousness to witness it, to be in wonder about it, and then to make some choices about how we're going to live with that knowledge without needing to put it on other people, to take it out on other people. The narrative that we live into and practice in this tradition is one of where people took out their angst, their anxiety, their fears, everything on the person that is our teacher. And so to show that we've learned a lesson to some degree, I would suggest that perhaps when we look at the teachings of Jesus, that not doing that, not doing what was done to him, is a very good guidepost in how to witness our own inner life. If we feel things going on, to not project it onto others, to not take it out on others, and to create that spaciousness so that we can hold that space that he did, where he forgave those who knew not what they do. Now, does that mean that we don't advocate for justice and things like that? I want to most assuredly say that that is not the case. But there's a way to anger and not sin, as the teachings teach. There's a way to be in conscious awareness of what's arising inside of us, and to not conform to the world, as the teachings say, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, by being able to witness and to be able to surrender those things to God. And as Peter says, it's like, cast all your cares on God, because God cares for us. To not do what humans tend to do and try to control it and figure it all out for ourselves, but to allow ourselves to be receptive to serenity and grace, etc. So using the word serene as our launch pad, where serenity comes from, you might be interested to know that the etymology of the word is clear. The word serene means clear or calm, and is very close to the word peaceful from Latin. And unclouded is another word that serene comes from, or is connected to the word serene. And it can come off as being cheerful or glad or tranquil, but essentially it means to be clear. And so for our purposes, we'll define serenity as being unclouded or unblocked. And so what we'll do is we will look at it in terms of, there is this clear path on our road of faith, with the God being our light, lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. But along the way, we may come or encounter these things that block us. And when those things that block us come up or cloud our vision, then we are not serene. But when clarity comes, when the blocks are removed, then we come back into that space of serenity. One of the famous poems that many people know is the Serenity Prayer by Reinhold Niebuhr. And that is connected to the 12-step program, which we'll touch on a little bit. But whenever I think of serenity, I think of that poem, or Serenity Prayer. But often we only hear the beginning. We don't hear the rest of the prayer. And so I want to share the full Serenity Prayer with you right now. It says, God, grant me the serenity. Hear that, it says, grant it to me. So God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, before I go any further, these are all under the auspices of granting. So God is granting the serenity, granting the courage, and granting the wisdom. So before we try to grab on and say, hey, I'm going to take this serenity by the horns, no, these things are granted to us. So we have been, if we're following the line of this prayer, we're asking to be granted serenity, granted courage, granted wisdom. And then the part that we don't often hear is living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, which is in some way in reference to James's count it all as joy when you go through various trials. Taking, as Christ did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Trusting that God will make things right if I surrender to God's will, so that I will be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with the Creator forever and ever in the next. Amen. I made a little bit of edits to make it gender inclusive language, but the essence of it remains the same, that we can be granted serenity and courage and wisdom, and to live one day at a time in this moment with acceptance of the world. And then our serenity will be additive to our lives and to the lives of others, even as we take our steps towards helping to create the world that we know is possible, the one that we dwell in our inner space. So in the New Testament, there's some words that we are pretty familiar with. The term stumbling block. It's used in the Hebrew Bible as well as the New Testament. And so for the sake of context, as we continue to look at serenity, meaning unblocked or unclouded, we look at what some stumbling blocks may be to living that life of serenity. Now, it may be interesting for you to know that the word for stumbling block is scandalon, and it's the basis of the English word scandalize, which means to trip somebody up. It also has been used to mean to cause someone to sin or to cause someone to miss the mark. So you would be a stumbling block if someone, using the archery term, to miss the mark. If someone's about to shoot their arrow and they have perfect aim in the bullseye, and you go boogity boogity, and then they go, oh, and that was scandalous. You just scandalized this person. You just tripped them up. You just caused them to sin, which is to miss the mark. To demystify the word sin, it's really to not hit your intended point. And we do that all day, every day. And we don't have to make it the oppressive statement that people make, because if your intention is to live your life in a way that fosters love and inclusivity and all those things, then it's important to know when you're not doing that and what is getting in the way of you doing that, so that you can continue to do that. It's not too different than your GPS telling you, hey, you meant to go left, but you went right. If you want to get to this destination, this is not the way to go, and if you say, shut up, GPS, don't tell me what to do. I've never been here before, but I'm just going to keep on going. That's on us. That's our decision. But if there's a clear path to get to where we want to be, and we choose to be upset because we don't want to know when we're going in a direction that's not on our own intention, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But of course, there's a lot of baggage with that term. We also, having the power to have a clear mind and to renew our thinking, can not hold on to the baggage that has been given, but we can take the terms and the different things and have them be useful in our lives and in the lives of those we serve. So, but going back to stumbling blocks, in a moment, I'm going to have you do just a little bit of a visualization to look at some things that may be stumbling blocks for you in particular. Everyone has their own, they're different as we are as human beings. But I wanted to, I guess I think I'll put some of these in the chat. Are you familiar with the nod of your head, or familiar with the 12 steps so I'll post the 12 steps into the chat, so that for those of you who are up here, you'll be able to see them. and then I'll read them, and then we'll go into visualization. So the 12 steps, as most people know, come from Alcoholics Anonymous, and they were established by a man that goes by Bill W., along with a co-founder whose name has not stuck in society that much. But I'm going to go ahead and put some of them in the chat. They're very powerful. I've never actually been in a 12-step program, but what I did discover the book when I was in a challenging time in my own faith journey, and I came across a book called Bill Speaks, and I just picked it up and read it, and then I found what's called the Big Book, which is a 12-step book, and I learned about the 12 steps out of the context of a 12-step actual program, but it had a profound effect on my life because I was at that time I was in a transition in my faith journey. And it was just amazing to encounter this. So they aren't numbered here. When I pasted it, the numbers didn't come across, but I'm going to post the first 6. And it starts with, we admitted that we were powerless over, and I put blank, but whatever the thing in your life that you may feel powerless over, and that our lives had become unmanageable. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And for these people, it's all in the context of alcohol or narcotics or anything that might keep them from living fully into the life that they have. But I would submit that it would not be different for workaholics. It wouldn't be different for someone who is filled with shame for one reason or the other. It wouldn't be different for someone who has religious hangups. They're keeping them from fully engaging with themselves and God. And neighbor. So now I'll post the next 6, and then we'll go into a little bit of a visualization. So the next ones say to, let me scroll back up a little bit. Humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And sometimes when we're trying to work on ourselves, we go back and maybe they're people we've harmed, but they may be gotten over and moved forward in their lives. And then we might say, well, I want to go tell them how I've changed. And then we disrupt their lives. So that's having the wisdom of knowing when to do that. Continued to take personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying for the knowledge of the Creator's will for us and the power to carry that out. Having had a spiritual awakening, this is the 12th step. As a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others struggling and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And I've said this to many people in my journey that it's very transformative to be able to have steps that call out being human. Being human itself is a struggle. Being human, there are challenges to it, especially when we have made any kind of contact with a higher expression of ourselves, because we then tend to compare our best selves, as we call it sometimes, to our lower selves and then feel like we're lacking or diminished in some capacity, when the reality is we're human, we're on a journey. And just as we say in our churches, in many of our churches, whoever you are and wherever you are on your journey, you're welcome here. We have to also say the same thing to ourselves. be whoever I am in this moment, wherever I am in this moment on my faith journey. I am welcome to myself, that I have cultivated space within myself to create an inner life that helps me to go through the struggling times. And then it's an inner life that I would be grateful for other people to have, and then it's sharing. And as one of my friends says, sharing is having more. One other thing he says before we go into the visualization is he talks about how many of us live in what he called the doo-doo universe. And he calls it the doo-doo universe because we're always trying to do, and trying to control the world by doing. And I would so venture to say that when I was in that faith struggle, as I mentioned earlier, I realized that I myself was trying to control God with my good behavior. That if I was a really good Christian who didn't make any mistakes, this is when I was in a different expression of Christianity, I realized in humility that it was my way of trying to control God in the universe. And I didn't think I was. I thought I was, a good Bible reading person doing it. But then when one thing, and I took disappointment, I tried to count it all as joy. I tried to do all the things that I said earlier in this time that we had together. And then I had a heartbreak, relational heartbreak. And I was fine with it. I told myself, oh, this is God's will, And then a friend who was not in the church said, you know how stupid you sound? And then I said, no, man, God, da, da, da. And I heard him describe me. And I was like, wow, I think I might sound kind of stupid. And everything collapsed. And I realized that it was a house of cards, and that this thing had come in and it knocked that house of cards down. And even though I had handled many things in my life, that one thing I wasn't equipped to handle. And when I came in contact with the fact that I wasn't able to be as strong as I always had been, I wasn't able to control my emotions as I had always been able to before, that I just was like, forget it all, forget this, forget God, forget everything. And it all fell apart. But it was actually the greatest experience in my life in the grand scheme of things, because it reminded me that I am human on a journey and that I'm going to fall, fail, stumble. But that's why grace is there, and once I realized that truly I wasn't my working or doing that was making things be any kind of way, but that being, to allow myself to just be and to have the same grace that I would want others to have and that I extended others to have for myself, it created a spaciousness that now I would love to share with people. And I would hope that if the inner life that I do have, I would offer that to people, because I know that it's going to be something that says, hey, we make mistakes, we learn, we grow. And as I say to my daughters, when they make mistakes, I say, you make mistakes, but it's okay, because we get better every day. A little rhyme to remind them. So now I want to give you a little opportunity to visualize, if you will, a road ahead of you. You can keep your eyes open, you can close your eyes, whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. And on this road, off into the distance, you can see where you want to be. You can see who you want to be. You can see the community that you want to foster. Whatever your ideal is, you can see it down the road. And now, one by one, as you ask yourself, how am I going to get from here to there? See what blocks may come up for you. Is it a relational block? Is it a financial block? Is it a religious block? Is it people, society, those terms that we use that seemingly oppress us from living more fully into the people we want to be? Whatever it is, see that on the road. And just take a moment to see what those blocks might be for you, or those perceived blocks. and take a deep breath. Some time ago, I had a dream, and I was standing at the front of a road, and there was an obstacle course in front of me. And there was a man standing to the side, and there were other people on the course with me. And he said, I want you to get from here to the end of the course when I say go. And he said, go. And everyone ran, and they started climbing over those obstacles and jumping over those obstacles and doing whatever they had to do to get through them. And meanwhile, I stood there at the starting line questioning. And I asked the man, what are the rules again? He said, get from here to the end of the course. And I asked him, do we have to go through the obstacles? You never mentioned going through the obstacles. And he smiled. And I stepped to the side, and I ran past every obstacle, not engaging any of them, and got to the end of the destination in moments. Meanwhile, everyone yelled at me and said it wasn't fair and I cheated. And then the person said, no, I never said you had to go through the obstacles. You chose to go through the obstacles. That was the path you chose. All I said was go from here to there. And so now I invite you, as you look at your road ahead and the obstacles or the stumbling blocks that may be in front of you, and I invite you, if you can, to see yourself simply stepping to the side and walking around them and going to that place. And if it's not an obstacle, but maybe it's a chasm, something that's missing, something that you say, if I had this, then I could do that. Or if this person showed up, then I would do that. Then I invite you to see just a big chasm and just jump over it. Just fly over it. This is the realm of your thought, and you can do anything in this realm. And so just move around that obstacle however you can and center yourself in the place where you want to be, the person that you want to be. And let's dwell there for just a moment. What does it feel like in your body to be who you know that you are? Now that you've taken a moment to dwell with who you are, that person that you choose to be, that expression of God's love, that neighbor, that partner, that minister, that worker, whoever it is, I want you to remember that at any moment, at any time, you can be still and know that you have access to this space, and that you can inform your present by dwelling with that version of yourself. Now I ask you to just come back to this space that we're in, and to just be. The same friend that I mentioned earlier shared a poem with me that was based off of the writings of E.E. Cummings. And it talks about the poetry of being. And it says, poetry is being, not doing. If you wish to follow, even at a distance, the poet's calling, you've got to come out of the measurable doing universe into the immeasurable house of being. Nobody else can be alive for you, nor can anyone be alive for anyone else. If you can take it and be. If you can't, cheer up and go about other people's business and do or undo until you drop. That itself is a humbling reminder that the doing universe, or the do-do universe, as he talked about, is not the pathway to serenity. But the serenity is something that we can receive by grace. As the prayer we entered with said, grant me the serenity. So grace, serenity, they're of the same ilk. And so I just invite you to allow yourself, when you can, to take that time that any one of us can take 2 minutes from the do-do universe and enter into the house of being. And that when we do that, we actually bring in that spaciousness, that non-anxious presence. Before I gathered with you all today, I spent time dwelling with the sense of relationship and the sense of being that we might have together, that us that I talked about in the beginning before we started recording. And for those of you who haven't heard that, I was saying that us is 2 letters, but it's a huge word, because whenever I and another join together and become us or become we, amazing things happen, whether we are aware of them or not. Worlds come together, lives change. And so as we go into our spaces after this time, we're going to become us all day. You know, every time you encounter another person, you're going to go from I to we or to us, and you're going to become in a more expanded space. So how do you contribute to that? Even in your work of justice, in the work of making change politically, all of those things, they all have power when it's us, when it's we, and when we bring the greatest part of ourselves to those moments. So thank you for listening to me and for participating. I think I'll close with this poem that I wrote called Serenity as well, and then we can bid ourselves farewell. So the poem is called Serenity, and it says, there is no serenity unless you know serenity. Living life abundantly is the essence of infinity. Something from nothing, creation is this simple. Concepts of the middle ground come from trying to keep it mental. What is your mission but to know life and live it? No thought of receiving when your spirit's led to giving. Serenity is the knowledge that you are who you are. In you is the universe with the composition of a star. My mind's eye sees what my mind's eye knows. Life is the vessel, love is the ocean on which it flows. We have to keep moving. There's no way to stop. The only death there is being what you're not. Be and it is means you are when you're being. Be still and know. You can't know when you're fleeing. In serenity, there's nowhere to hide and nothing to run from, since death is a lie. Dreams give you direction to where it is you're going. Life is perpetual, constantly flowing. The only sin there is denying what is real. Don't interpret your feelings. Feel what you feel. Accept you're the miracle you've looked for but couldn't find. There's nothing hidden that isn't in your mind. There's peace in reality if you live for God's dream. This is the definition of what serenity means. So live. So I ask you to live. As Howard Thurman said, don't ask what the world needs, ask what made you come alive, because what the world needs is people who've come alive. So my prayer for all of us is that we increasingly become more alive and invite others to live with us. Amen.